Hannah Crawford's world shattered the moment her brother-in-law slammed the door in her face. 3 hungry boys clinging to her skirts, winter coming fast and nowhere to go. She'd walked 2 days through Colorado dust with everything she owned in a single trunk, believing family meant something. She was wrong. But when a stranger with kind eyes offered what blood refused, she had to choose pride or survival. What happened next changed everything. Before we begin, please subscribe to our channel and stay until the very end of this story. You won't believe what happens. Comment below what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The bench outside Willow Creek's general store had seen better days. Splintered wood, faded paint, and the initials of 100 bored cowboys carved into its surface. Hannah Crawford added her own mark that afternoon, though not with a knife, with the weight of complete and utter defeat. She sat there with her 3 sons pressed against her like birds huddling before a storm, and she couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except replay the last 10 minutes over and over in her head until she thought she might go mad. "We don't have room for a woman with mouths to feed." Daniel Crawford had said it like he was commenting on the weather. Standing in his doorway with his arms crossed, blocking the entrance to the house that should have been sanctuary. His house. Thomas's brother's house. Family. Except family meant nothing when you came with empty pockets and 3 hungry children. James sat rigid beside her, his 8-year-old hand gripping hers so tight her fingers had gone white. He hadn't cried, hadn't made a sound since the door closed, just held on like she might disappear if he let go. Samuel, barely 6, had his face buried in her skirts. His shoulders still shook with silent sobs. And William. William kept asking the question that was breaking her into smaller and smaller pieces. "Mama? When do we eat, Mama? I'm hungry. Mama?" "Soon, baby." Her voice came out flat. Dead. Soon. 37 cents. That's what she had left in the world. 37 cents and a dead husband's pocket watch that nobody wanted to buy. Not enough for a room. Not enough for a meal. Not enough for anything, except maybe one night under a bridge if she could find one. The door of the general store opened behind her. She heard whispers, then quickly stifled. A woman's voice. "Poor thing. Wonder what she'll do now." A man's response too low to make out. Then laughter. Actual laughter. Hannah closed her eyes and tried to remember how to breathe. It hadn't always been like this. 6 months ago, she'd had a husband, a home, a life. Thomas Crawford had been a good man, quiet, steady, reliable as sunrise. They'd had a small farm in Kansas. Nothing fancy, but it was theirs. The boys had been happy. She'd been happy. Then the fever came. 3 days. That's all it took. 3 days of watching her husband burn up from the inside, thrashing in sheets soaked with sweat, calling for water she couldn't give him fast enough. 3 days of praying to a God who apparently had better things to do. 3 days, and then he was gone. The bank took the farm 2 months later. The neighbors who'd promised to help disappeared the moment things got difficult. And Hannah had packed everything she could carry, loaded her boys into a borrowed wagon, and headed west to Colorado, where Thomas's brother had settled. Family would help. Family had to help. She'd been wrong. "Mama." James's voice was barely a whisper. "That man over there keeps staring at us." Hannah didn't look up. She couldn't bear to see more pity, more judgment, more proof that the world had no place for a widow with 3 sons and no prospects. "Just ignore him, James." "But Mama," "I said ignore him." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. James flinched and went quiet. Hannah immediately felt sick with guilt, but she couldn't apologize. Couldn't soften. If she let herself feel anything right now, she'd crack open completely, and she couldn't afford to crack. Not here, not in front of the whole town. "You boys stay put," she said quietly. "I need to think." Think. Right. As if there was anything left to think about. Her choices had narrowed to a point so sharp she could barely see it anymore. She could try another town, but she'd arrive in the same condition, broke desperate alone. She could try to find work here, but who would hire a woman with 3 children? She could know. She couldn't think about the other options. The ones that desperate women with no choices sometimes took. She'd die first. She'd let her boys starve first. Except she wouldn't. That was the hell of it. When it came down to survival, she'd do whatever it took to keep them alive, and that knowledge sat in her stomach like a stone. Mrs. Crawford. Hannah's head snapped up. A man stood in front of her, blocking the late afternoon sun. Tall, maybe 40, with weathered skin and eyes that had seen hard weather. He held his hat in his hands. "I don't—" She stopped, pulled her boys closer. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "No, ma'am. Name's Dawson Baxter. I run a ranch west of here, Circle B." Hannah said nothing. Just waited for whatever was coming next. The proposition. The offer with strings attached. The thing that every desperate woman dreaded. But Dawson Baxter didn't make a proposition. He crouched down instead, bringing himself to eye level, and somehow that simple gesture, not looming, not using his size, made her throat go tight. "I overheard what happened at the Crawford place," he said quietly. "Town this size word travels fast. I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry your family turned you away. We're managing fine." The lie tasted like ash. "Ma'am, I'm not here to judge your situation. I'm here to offer work." Hannah stared at him. "Work?" "Yes, ma'am. Honest work. I need someone who can cook for ranch hands and help manage the household. And the town, well, the town needs a school teacher. Mrs. Appleton passed last month, and the children have been running wild since. If you can read and write—" "I can read and write." "Then the position's yours if you want it. Pays $20 a month. Not much, but it's steady." $20. Hannah's mind raced. That was enough. Enough for food. Enough to start saving enough to— where would we stay? The question came out before she could stop it, and she immediately hated herself for sounding so desperate, so eager. "I've got a foreman's cabin sitting empty. 3 rooms, good stove well nearby. You'd stay there. No rent while you're working for me." It was too good. Too easy. There had to be a catch. "What do you want?" Hannah asked flatly. "Really want, I mean." Dawson Baxter's expression didn't change. "I want someone who'll show up on time, work hard, and teach the children proper. That's all. That's all. That's all. You expect me to believe a man offers a strange woman room and board and wages out of the goodness of his heart?" Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or old grief. "I expect you to make your own decision about what you believe, ma'am. But I'm telling you the truth. I need help. You need work. Seems like a fair arrangement to me." Hannah looked at her boys. James was watching the exchange with sharp, worried eyes. Samuel had stopped crying and was listening intently. William had his thumb in his mouth, something he only did when he was scared. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "and things aren't— if the situation isn't what you're saying it is, I'll leave. Immediately. Wouldn't expect anything else. And I work for my keep. I don't accept charity. Wouldn't offer it. I need someone who'll earn their place, not someone looking for a handout." Hannah took a deep breath. Her instincts were screaming at her to be careful, to look for the trap, to protect herself and her boys. But another part of her, the part that was so tired of fighting, so tired of being afraid, wanted desperately to believe that maybe, just maybe, there were still good people in the world. "We'll come," she said, "for a trial period. 1 week. If it works for both of us, we stay. If not, we part ways with no hard feelings." Dawson nodded. "Fair enough." He gestured toward a wagon hitched in front of the mercantile. "I've got to load up supplies first. Should take about 20 minutes. You and the boys can wait here or meet me over there when you're ready." He walked away without another word, leaving her to decide. Not pressuring, not hovering, just giving her space to make her own choice. "Mama," James whispered. Are we really going with him? I think so. What if he's lying? What if he's bad? Hannah pulled her oldest son close. Then we'll leave. But James, we don't have many options right now. We have to take some risks. Uncle Daniel was supposed to help us. There was betrayal in his voice, sharp and raw. Daddy said family always helps family. I know, baby. Your daddy believed that. But some people... She stopped, swallowed hard. Some people don't have room in their hearts for anything except their own comfort. That's not our fault. That's theirs. She meant it. She'd spent the last hour drowning in shame, but talking to James now, she felt anger rising up instead. Sharp, clean anger. Daniel Crawford had turned away his own blood. 3 children who'd just lost their father. And why? Because they were inconvenient. Because helping required sacrifice. Well, let him live with that. Let him look himself in the mirror every morning and know what he'd done. She was done feeling ashamed for needing help. Done apologizing for having the audacity to still be alive when her husband wasn't. Come on, boys. She stood up, brushing dust from her skirts. We're going to take Mr. Baxter up on his offer, and we're going to work harder than anyone has ever worked before. Understood? Yes, Mama, they chorused. Hannah picked up her single bag. Everything she owned in the world fit in one carpet bag now and walked across the street. Her spine was straight, her head high. Let the town watch. Let them whisper. She was done caring what people thought. Dawson was loading flour sacks into the wagon bed when they approached. He looked up, and something like approval crossed his face. Decided to take a chance, did you? A calculated risk, Hannah corrected. There's a difference. Fair point. He helped her up onto the wagon seat, then lifted William up beside her. You boys comfortable riding in back? He asked James and Samuel. Yes, sir. Samuel was already climbing up, excited despite everything. James followed more cautiously, but Hannah saw his shoulders relax slightly. The promise of food and shelter did that made the world seem a little less terrifying. The wagon rolled out just as the first drops of rain began to fall. Hannah pulled William close and watched Willow Creek disappear behind them. She didn't look back, didn't let herself think about what they were leaving. There was nothing there worth remembering anyway. Storm's been threatening all day, Dawson said, glancing at the darkening sky. Should make it to the ranch before it really hits. How long have you been ranching, Mr. Baxter? Just Dawson, please, and about 12 years now. That's a long time. Long enough to know what I'm doing. Most days anyway. He said it with the hint of a smile, and Hannah found herself almost smiling back. They rode in silence for a while. The rain picked up gradually, turning from a sprinkle to a steady drumming. William dozed against her shoulder. Behind them she could hear James and Samuel talking in low voices. Can I ask you something? Hannah said finally. You can ask. Can't promise I'll answer. Why did you stop in town, I mean? You could have just ridden past. Why didn't you? Dawson was quiet for a long moment. His hands were steady on the reins, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. 12 years ago, I was in a similar position to yours. Not exactly the same, but close enough. I'd lost everything, had nowhere to go. And someone who didn't owe me anything, gave me a chance. Gave me work, gave me a purpose, helped me get back on my feet. He paused. That person's gone now, but I made myself a promise. If I ever got to a place where I could help someone else the way I'd been helped, I would. So when I saw you sitting there with those boys looking like the world had ended, he shrugged. Seemed like the universe was giving me an opportunity to keep that promise. Hannah felt her throat tighten. That's a kind promise to make. Kind has nothing to do with it. It's practical. You need work. I need help. The teacher position pays through the town, so that's not even coming out of my pocket. And having someone who can cook decent food will improve morale among the hands. Believe me, after 6 months of burnt beans and tough biscuit, They'll be grateful for anyone who can boil water without setting something on fire. He was trying to make it sound transactional businesslike, but Hannah heard what lay beneath genuine compassion, the kind that came from someone who'd known real hardship and hadn't let it make him bitter. "Still," she said quietly, "thank you. Save your thanks until you've met the ranch hands. They're good men, but they're rough around the edges. And loud. And they smell like horses and sweat about 90% of the time. I grew up with 4 brothers. I can handle rough." 4 brothers. Dawson glanced at her. "That explains the backbone." "The what?" "The backbone. The way you looked at me in town like you were ready to fight if I said one wrong word. That doesn't come from nowhere. That comes from growing up scrappy." Hannah felt something loosen in her chest. "I was ready to fight. I thought you were—" "I know what you thought. Most men would be." His jaw tightened. "For what it's worth, I've got a zero-tolerance policy on my ranch. Any man who treats a woman with anything less than complete respect finds himself looking for work elsewhere, fast. You've had to fire people for that. Twice. Both times the first day they showed their true colors. I don't give second chances on that particular issue." The wagon crested a hill, and Hannah saw the Circle B spread out below them. Even in the rain and fading light, it was impressive, a large ranch house with a wraparound porch, multiple barns, corrals with horses moving restlessly in the weather, smaller cabins dotted around the property. Smoke rose from several chimneys. Lanterns glowed in windows. It looked like civilization, like safety, like home. "That's us," Dawson said. "About 3,000 acres total. We run cattle, mostly some horses. I've got 15 men working for me right now. Good crew. We're not the biggest operation in Colorado, but we're solid." "It's beautiful," Hannah breathed. "It's a lot of work. But yeah, I suppose it is." He guided the wagon past the main house toward a smaller cabin set back near a grove of cottonwood trees. "This is yours. Was the foreman's quarters before he retired last spring. Been sitting empty since." He pulled the wagon to a stop and jumped down, then came around to help her. His hands were calloused but gentle, steadying her as she climbed down with William still drowsy in her arms. James and Samuel tumbled out of the back, staring around with wide eyes. The cabin was small but solid. One main room with a kitchen area and table, 2 smaller rooms off to the sides. Simple furniture, nothing fancy but clean. Through the window she could see a well-maintained yard, a small garden plot, a chicken coop. "Previous foreman's wife kept chickens," Dawson said, following her gaze. "They're still there if you want them. Eggs would be yours." Hannah set William down and walked slowly through the space. The walls were chinked tight against drafts. The stove looked functional. The beds in the small rooms had actual mattresses, thin but present. There were shelves, a mirror, even a few books left behind. It was more than she'd dared hope for. "The well's about 30 yards that way." Dawson continued, pointing. "Water's clean. There's a smokehouse beyond that, and the main house is where you'll be cooking. We've got a bigger kitchen set up there. As for the teaching, the schoolhouse is in town about a mile up the road. Mrs. Henderson, she runs the boarding house she's been coordinating. You'll want to talk to her tomorrow, get a sense of how many students and what supplies you'll need." Hannah turned to face him. "When do you need me to start?" "Day after tomorrow. That gives you tomorrow to settle in, get your bearings, maybe come up to the main house and see the kitchen set up. No need to rush into things." "I can start tomorrow." "You just traveled for days and went through hell. Take the time to rest." "Mr. Baxter Dawson, I appreciate the concern, but I'd rather start working. The sooner I start, the sooner I'm earning my keep." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, tomorrow morning then. Come up to the main house around 6. I'll introduce you to the crew at breakfast." 6 o'clock. I'll be there." "Good." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Hannah." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about hearing it made her realize how long it had been since anyone had spoken to her with simple respect. Not Mrs. Crawford, dripping with pity. Not ma'am from people looking down their noses. Just her name, plain and honest. Yes. You did a brave thing today, taking a chance on a stranger. That takes courage. I didn't have much choice. You always have a choice. You could have given up, gone back to Kansas, tried another town, but you chose to keep fighting for your boys. That matters. He left before she could respond, striding through the rain toward the main house. Hannah stood in the doorway and watched him go, feeling something shift inside her chest. Not hope she wasn't ready for hope yet, but maybe the absence of despair. Maybe the first tiny flicker of possibility. Mama. James appeared at her elbow. Is this really ours? For now, yes. It's nice. He said it quietly, like he was afraid to jinx it. Better than Uncle Daniel's would have been. James. I mean it. Uncle Daniel was mean. I didn't like him. Samuel came to stand on her other side, nodding agreement. Mr. Dawson seems nice. He has kind eyes. Out of the mouths of babes. Hannah pulled her boys close, one arm around each of them, and let herself acknowledge the truth. Yes, Dawson Baxter did have kind eyes. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't a trap. Maybe some people really were as decent as they appeared. All right, boys, she said, forcing energy into her voice. Let's explore our new home. James, you and Samuel can share the room on the left. William and I will take the right. We'll get a fire going in the stove, and then... A knock at the door interrupted her. She opened it to find a young man standing there, maybe 20, with a covered basket in his hands. He was soaking wet and grinning. Ma'am, I'm Charlie. Mr. Baxter sent dinner down for you and the boys. Said you probably didn't have supplies yet. That's very kind. Thank you, Charlie. No problem, ma'am. Oh, and he said to tell you there's firewood stacked on the side of the house. I can bring some in for you if you'd like. I can manage, but thank you. Charlie tipped his hat and headed back toward the bunkhouse. Hannah brought the basket inside and set it on the table. When she lifted the cloth, she nearly cried. Roasted chicken, fresh bread, beans, carrots, and what looked like apple pie. Enough food for all of them, plus some to spare. Boys, she called, come eat. They descended on the food like locusts. Hannah made them slow down, forced them to eat properly despite their hunger. As she watched them tear into the meal, she felt something crack open inside her chest. Relief so profound it was almost painful. They were safe, fed, warm. For the first time in months, they weren't running, weren't terrified of what tomorrow would bring. After dinner, she got the boys cleaned up and into bed. They were asleep within minutes, exhausted from the long day. Hannah stood in the doorway between the two rooms and watched them sleep, James with his arm flung over his head, Samuel curled in a ball, William clutching a blanket corner in his fist. Then she went back to the main room, sat at the table, and finally let herself fall apart. The sobs came from somewhere deep and ancient, a place she'd locked away for months because she couldn't afford to break. But here, in the privacy of this small cabin with her sleeping sons safe in the next room, she could let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. Grief for Thomas, the good man who'd never see his sons grow up. Rage at Daniel for his cruelty. Humiliation at having to beg for help. Terror at how close they'd come to the edge. And underneath it all, relief, shaky, fragile relief that maybe, just maybe, they'd be okay. She didn't know how long she cried. Long enough that her throat went raw and her eyes burned. When the tears finally stopped, she felt hollow but strangely clean. Like a storm had passed through and left clearer air behind. Hannah stood and went to the window. The rain had stopped. Stars were beginning to appear between the breaking clouds. Somewhere in the darkness, she heard an owl calling. A horse whinnied in the corral. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. From the main house, a light still burned in an upstairs window. She wondered if Dawson Baxter was up there looking out at the same stars. Wondered what he was thinking. Wondered about the loss. He'd mentioned the person who'd helped him 12 years ago and was now gone. There was a story there. Pain buried deep and carefully hidden. She recognized it because she carried the same kind of weight. Maybe that's why he'd stopped for her. Not just because of a promise, but because he understood what it meant to lose everything and have to rebuild from ashes. Hannah pressed her hand against the cool glass and made her own promise. She'd work harder than any employee he'd ever had. She'd earn her place here 10 times over. She'd prove that his kindness hadn't been wasted. And maybe along the way, she'd figure out how to be more than just a widow struggling to survive. Maybe she'd figure out how to live again. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The land stretched away into darkness, vast, unforgiving, beautiful. And in this small cabin on the edge of nowhere, a woman and her 3 sons slept deeply for the first time in months. Safe. Fed. Home. At least for tonight. And tonight, after everything they'd been through, that was enough. Dawn came cold and clear, the kind of morning that made everything look scrubbed clean and new. Hannah woke before sunrise, her body still trained to farm rhythms despite months of chaos. For a moment, she lay there confused, staring at an unfamiliar ceiling before memory crashed back. Colorado. The ranch. Dawson Baxter's unexpected kindness. She was out of bed before the thought finished forming. The boys were still asleep, tangled in blankets and dreaming whatever children dreamed after surviving the worst day of their lives. Hannah dressed quickly in the dark, pinned up her hair, and stepped outside into air so crisp it hurt to breathe. The ranch was already stirring. Lanterns moved in the bunkhouse. Horses stamped in the corral. Somewhere a rooster was making his opinions known about the new day. Hannah stood on the small porch and watched the world wake up, feeling oddly disconnected from her own body, like she was observing someone else's life from a great distance. This was real. This was happening. Yesterday, she'd had nothing, and today she had a job, a home, a chance. It felt fragile as spun glass, like one wrong move would shatter everything. She made her way to the main house at 5:45, her hands shaking slightly. The kitchen door was unlocked. Inside, she found a massive room that made her breath catch, a cast-iron stove big enough to feed an army-long wooden tables, shelves stocked with supplies, windows facing east to catch the morning light. It was 10 times the size of any kitchen she'd ever worked in. "You're early." Hannah spun around. Dawson stood in the doorway, hair damp, like he'd just washed, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one without asking if she wanted it. "I like to get a head start," she said, wrapping her hands around the warm tin cup. "So do I." He leaned against the doorframe, studying her. "Sleep all right?" "Better than I have in months." "Good. The boys?" "Still asleep. I'll need to wake them soon, get them ready for—" She stopped. "Actually, what do I do with them while I'm working? I didn't think about that." "Bring them up here. They can eat with the hands, then James and Samuel can help with light chores if they're willing. William's young enough, he can just play in the yard. Ranch has plenty of space for boys to be boys." Relief flooded through her. "You're sure they won't be in the way?" "Hannah, I've got 15 grown men who act like children half the time. 3 actual children won't make much difference." He said it deadpan, and she found herself smiling despite her nerves. The back door banged open and men started filing in, loud and stomping and smelling exactly like Dawson had warned horses and sweat and hard work. They stopped short when they saw Hannah, suddenly awkward hats coming off heads in a fumbling wave. "Boys, this is Mrs. Crawford," Dawson said. "She'll be cooking for us starting today and teaching school in town. I expect you to treat her with respect and keep your language clean in her presence. Anyone who can't manage that can find work elsewhere." "Yes, sir," came the chorus. "Mrs. Crawford, this is my crew. You'll learn names as you go. Most important one is Pete." He gestured to a grizzled man with a gray beard. "He's my foreman. Anything you need, he can help." Pete stepped forward and tipped his hat. "Pleasure, ma'am. Been eating my own cooking for 6 months now, so having someone who knows their way around a kitchen is a genuine blessing." "I'll do my best," Hannah said. "That's all we ask." Pete turned to the other men. All right, you lot, sit down and try to remember your manners. They settled around the long table like awkward schoolboys, elbowing each other and whispering. Hannah felt their eyes on her as she moved to the stove, assessing her like she was assessing them. Could she cook? Would she last? Was she as desperate as she looked? Let them wonder. She'd prove herself soon enough. Dawson had already started the fire in the stove. Coffee was brewing. Hannah found eggs, bacon flour for biscuits. Her hands knew what to do even while her mind raced. She fell into the rhythm of cooking the way some people fell into prayer, automatic, comforting, purposeful. The men were silent at first, stealing glances. Then Charlie, the young one from last night, broke the ice. Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, where are you from originally? Kansas, a small farm outside Salina. I grew up in Missouri myself. Farm country. You know much about ranching? Not much, Hannah admitted, cracking eggs into a bowl. But I learned fast. That's the spirit, Pete said approvingly. Half of ranching is just figuring things out as you go anyway. The conversation loosened after that. The men started talking among themselves, arguing about horses and weather, and whose turn it was to muck out the far barn. Hannah listened while she cooked, picking up names and personalities. Charlie was the youngest and most eager to please. Pete was steady as bedrock. A man named Jack had a tendency to complain about everything. Another, called Slim, ironically, built like a bull, had a laugh that shook the rafters. They were rough, yes. Crude in their humor. But not unkind, not dangerous, just working men far from home, making the best of hard lives. Hannah served breakfast in stages, biscuits first, then eggs and bacon, then more coffee as cups emptied. The men ate like they were starving, which maybe they were after 6 months of Pete's cooking. Nobody spoke much once food hit the table, too busy shoveling it in. When Charlie reached for his third biscuit, Pete smacked his hand. Leave some for the rest of us, you bottomless pit. Can't help it if they're good. They're better than good, Slim said through a mouthful. Ma'am, these are the best biscuits I've had since my mother died. The table went quiet. Slim looked mortified. I mean, that came out wrong. I didn't mean to bring up. It's all right, Hannah said gently. I'll take it as the compliment you intended. The tension broke. The men went back to eating, and Hannah felt something settle in her chest. She could do this. She could hold her own here. Dawson caught her eye from the end of the table and gave her the smallest nod. Approval. Maybe even respect. When breakfast ended, the men filed out to start their day's work. Pete lingered, helping Hannah clear plates without being asked. You did good, he said quietly. That wasn't easy, walking into a room full of strange men and just taking charge. But you handled it. I didn't have much choice. There's always a choice. You chose to hold your head up. That matters. He set the last of the dishes in the wash basin. Dawson told me a bit about your situation. Not details, just that you'd had a hard time of it. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. This place has been missing something since Sarah died, and I think maybe it's been missing a woman's presence. Hannah's hands stilled in the soapy water. Sarah... Pete's expression shifted like he'd said something he shouldn't have. Sarah was Dawson's wife. She and their baby died 12 years ago. Childbirth complications. He doesn't talk about it much, but it's why he built this place, needed something to pour all that grief into. Anyway, I should get to work. You need anything, just holler. He left before Hannah could respond. She stood at the sink, hands buried in dishwater, trying to process this new information. Dawson had been married, had lost a wife and child in one terrible blow. The pain she'd sensed in him yesterday suddenly made horrible sense. They'd both survived the unsurvivable. Both rebuilt themselves from ashes. Maybe that's why he'd recognized her desperation so quickly. He'd worn the same expression once. Mama. Hannah turned to find William bursting through the door, James and Samuel behind him. All three were dressed, but rumpled, clearly having put clothes on in a hurry. There you are, she said, relief and exasperation mixing. I was about to come wake you. We woke up and you were gone, James said accusingly. We didn't know where you were. I'm sorry, baby. I should have left a note. I came up here to cook breakfast for the ranch hands. Did you save us any? William asked hopefully. Of course I did. Hannah fixed them plates and watched them eat, her heart settling. They looked better this morning, rested, less hollow-eyed. Samuel was actually smiling as he stuffed biscuit in his mouth. Dawson appeared in the doorway as they were finishing. Boys sleep well. Yes, sir, James said politely. Good. How'd you like to see the horses this morning? I could use some help in the stable if you're interested. All three boys lit up like Christmas morning. Really? Samuel breathed. Really? But you have to follow instructions exactly. Horses are big and can be dangerous if you're not careful. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Dawson looked at Hannah for permission. She hesitated. Her boys, her responsibility, her job to keep them safe. But the hope in their faces was impossible to deny. All right, she said. But you listen to Mr. Baxter. No running, no loud noises, and stay where he can see you. We will, Mama. They were already halfway out the door. Dawson lingered. I'll watch them close, and Pete's good with kids. He'll keep an eye out too. Thank you. For everything. The job, the cabin, letting them... Her voice cracked slightly. I don't know how to repay this kindness. You're repaying it by being here, by giving those men a decent meal, by teaching the town's children. He paused. And maybe by letting yourself believe that not everyone in the world is cruel. Daniel Crawford was wrong to turn you away. That's his shame, not yours. The words hit harder than Hannah expected. She'd been carrying Daniel's rejection like proof of her own worthlessness. But Dawson was right. The shame belonged to the one who'd closed the door, not the one who'd knocked. I should get back to the boys, Dawson said. You've got plenty of time before you need to head into town to meet Mrs. Henderson about the teaching position. Maybe take an hour to yourself. Walk the property, rest, whatever you need. He left before she could argue. Hannah finished the dishes in silence, her mind spinning. An hour to herself. When was the last time she'd had that? Months? Maybe longer. She stepped outside into morning sunshine that was starting to warm the air. The ranch stretched out in all directions, fields, forests, mountains in the distance. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. Open, free, alive. Hannah walked without direction, just moving, letting her legs carry her where they wanted. She found the chicken coop Dawson had mentioned, a dozen hens pecking contentedly in the yard. The garden plot was overgrown, but salvageable. She'd plant vegetables in the spring if they were still here. If this lasted. If. Always if. She couldn't let herself believe in permanence yet. Couldn't trust that this wouldn't be snatched away like everything else had been. But maybe she could trust today. Just today. One foot in front of the other. She heard laughter and followed the sound to the corral, where her boys were standing on the fence rails, watching Dawson work with a young horse. He was talking to them while he moved, explaining what he was doing, why the horse responded certain ways. James was listening intently, asking questions. Samuel looked mesmerized. William was just happy to be included. Hannah stayed back watching. This was what childhood should look like, not fear and hunger and constant moving, but this sunshine and horses and a patient man teaching them things their father should have lived to teach them. Thomas would have liked Dawson, she thought suddenly. They were cut from similar cloth, steady, reliable kind, without making a show of it. Thomas would have trusted him with their boys. The thought brought tears to her eyes, but they weren't entirely sad. Mixed in with the grief was something else. Gratitude, maybe. Or the beginning of peace. She wiped her eyes and headed toward town before anyone could see her crying. The walk to Willow Creek took 30 minutes. Hannah used the time to rehearse what she'd say to Mrs. Henderson, how she'd present herself, what credentials she could offer. She'd taught her own boys to read and write. She'd helped at their school in Kansas sometimes. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. The boarding house sat at the center of town, a 3-story building with a wide porch and flowers in window boxes. Hannah climbed the steps and knocked. The woman who answered was maybe 60 with iron gray hair and sharp eyes that took Hannah's measure in one sweeping glance. "Mrs. Crawford, I presume I'm Eleanor Henderson. Dawson sent word yesterday that you'd be coming by." "Yes, ma'am. I understand the town needs a teacher. Desperately. Come in, come in. We'll talk over tea." Eleanor's sitting room was cluttered but comfortable, full of books and knitting and the accumulated weight of a long life well lived. She poured tea from a china pot and gestured for Hannah to sit. "So, you're the widow with 3 boys that Daniel Crawford turned away." Hannah stiffened. "News travels fast." "Small town, dear. People talk. Don't worry, most of them think Daniel's an ass and are glad you found better help elsewhere." Eleanor sipped her tea. "Dawson's a good man. Lost too much too young, but he came through it decent, which is more than most can say. He mentioned you coordinate the schooling. As much as anyone does. We've got about 15 children of school age scattered around the area. They've been coming to the old schoolhouse when they remember, but without a proper teacher it's been chaos. Can you handle 15 children ranging from 6 to 14? I can certainly try. That's all I ask. The pay is $20 a month supplied by the town council. You'll teach reading, writing, arithmetic, and whatever else you deem necessary. School runs Monday through Friday, 8 to 3. Think you can manage $20. Combined with her work at the ranch, she'd have actual income. Enough to start saving. Enough to build something resembling security." "I can manage," Hannah said firmly. "Good. When can you start?" "Monday." "Perfect. I'll spread the word to the families. You'll want to get to the schoolhouse before then, take stock of what supplies you've got. It's in rough shape, I'll warn you now. Mrs. Appleton was lovely, but not much for organization." They talked for another hour about curriculum, discipline, expectations. Eleanor was brisk and practical, asking intelligent questions and offering useful advice. By the time Hannah left, she felt both terrified and exhilarated. A real job. A real purpose beyond just survival. She was halfway back to the ranch when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Hannah moved to the side of the road and turned to see a wagon approaching. Her stomach dropped when she recognized the driver. Daniel Crawford, with his wife beside him. For a moment, Hannah considered just walking away, ignoring them completely. But pride made her stand her ground. She wouldn't run, wouldn't cower. She'd done nothing wrong. Daniel pulled the wagon to a stop. His wife, Margaret, Hannah remembered, looked uncomfortable. Daniel just looked annoyed. "So you found yourself a situation," he said without preamble. "I did. With Dawson Baxter, I hear. Living in his foreman's cabin. Cooking for his men." The implication in his tone was crystal clear, ugly, and accusatory. Hannah felt rage spike through her, white-hot and clarifying. "I'm working for room and board same as any ranch hand, and I'm teaching school in town. All of it honest work, which is more than I can say for family who turn away widows and orphans." Margaret flinched. Daniel's face went red. "Now you listen here. No, you listen." Hannah stepped closer to the wagon, her voice shaking but strong. "Thomas was your brother. Your blood. Those boys are his sons, your nephews. And you slammed a door in their faces when they had nowhere else to go. That's not poverty speaking, that's cruelty. You had room. You just didn't want to be inconvenienced. We have our own. I don't care what excuses you've built for yourself, Daniel. I don't care if you sleep easy at night, or if it eats at you. But understand this, I don't need your help anymore. I found better. I found people with actual human decency. So you can take your judgment and your implications, and you can—" She stopped herself before saying something truly unforgivable. "You can go home. We're done here." She turned and walked away, leaving them sitting in the wagon. Her legs were shaking, her hands were trembling, but she didn't look back. Behind her, she heard the wagon start up again, rolling in the opposite direction. Good. Let him choke on his own bitterness. Hannah made it another 100 yards before she had to stop, leaning against a fence post while she caught her breath. She'd just burned that bridge to ashes. There was no going back now, no family safety net if things went wrong at the ranch. But God, it had felt good. Standing up for herself, refusing to accept his shame, choosing her own dignity over his conditional charity. She was still standing there when another horse approached. This time it was Dawson riding alone. "Saw you talking to Daniel Crawford," he said, dismounting. Looked heated. He implied things about my living arrangements. Dawson's expression went cold and hard. "What kind of things?" "The kind that question a woman's morality when she accepts help from a man." Hannah met his eyes steadily. "I told him what he could do with his implications." A smile tugged at Dawson's mouth despite the anger in his eyes. "Good. Daniel Crawford is a small man with a smaller mind. Don't waste energy worrying about his opinions." "I'm not worried. I'm furious. But I'm also done. I said my piece and I'm moving on." "That's healthy." Dawson studied her. "You all right, really?" "I'm better than all right. I just defended myself for the first time in months and it felt incredible." She laughed, surprised by the sound. "Is that terrible? Should I feel bad about burning that bridge?" "Some bridges deserve to burn." Dawson offered his hand. "Come on, I'll give you a ride back. You've walked enough for one day." Hannah let him pull her up onto the horse behind him. She'd never ridden like this, sitting behind a man holding on to stay balanced. It felt oddly intimate, her hands at his waist, the warmth of him blocking the wind. They rode in silence for a while. Then Dawson spoke, his voice careful. "Pete told me he mentioned Sarah, my wife." "He did. I'm sorry for your loss. It was a long time ago. Time doesn't make grief disappear, just changes how it sits." "No," Dawson agreed quietly. "It doesn't." They crested the hill, and the Circle B spread out below them, golden in afternoon light. Hannah saw her boys playing in the yard near the cabin, chasing each other and laughing. Safe, happy, home. "Thank you," she said softly, "for giving us this chance. You're earning it. Already have, actually. The men were singing your praises at lunch. Apparently your biscuits have achieved legendary status in under 12 hours. Hannah smiled despite herself. "It's just flour and butter." "It's more than that. It's the first home-cooked meal some of those boys have had in years. It matters more than you know." They reached the barn, and Dawson dismounted, then helped her down. His hands lingered just a moment longer than necessary, and Hannah felt something spark between them. Awareness, maybe, or the recognition of shared grief, creating unexpected connection. Then he stepped back, professional distance restored. "I should get back to work. You need anything?" "No, thank you." He tipped his hat and walked away. Hannah stood watching him go, feeling confused and unsettled. She wasn't ready for attraction. Wasn't ready to think about any man that way. Thomas had only been gone 6 months. But Dawson Baxter wasn't just any man. He was safety, kindness, understanding, and something in her tired, broken heart was starting to respond to that, whether she was ready or not. Hannah pushed the thought away and went to find her boys. They tackled her with hugs and stories about horses, and Slim letting them help groom a mare. They smelled like hay and sunshine and childhood. That night, after dinner and baths and bedtime stories, Hannah sat on the cabin's small porch and watched stars appear. The ranch settled into evening quiet animals, bedding down men returning to the bunkhouse, the day's work done. From the main house, lamplight glowed in the same upstairs window she'd noticed last night. Dawson's room, probably. She wondered if he was looking out at the same stars, thinking his own thoughts, carrying his own ghosts. 2 broken people under the same sky, both trying to figure out how to live again. Hannah didn't know what would happen next. Didn't know if this job would last, or if she'd prove adequate to the challenges ahead. But tonight, her boys were sleeping soundly. Tonight, she had work to do tomorrow. Tonight she wasn't running. Tonight was enough. And maybe, just maybe, tomorrow would be too. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that Hannah hadn't experienced since before Thomas died, the comfort of routine of knowing what each day would bring. She woke before dawn, cooked breakfast for the ranch hands, spent her afternoons teaching 15 restless children in a drafty schoolhouse, then returned to prepare dinner and care for her boys. It was exhausting work, but it was honest work, and for the first time in months, she fell asleep each night feeling useful instead of desperate. The schoolhouse had been worse than Eleanor warned. Broken windows, mouse droppings in the corners, books so water-damaged they fell apart when touched. Hannah spent her first weekend there scrubbing and organizing while her boys helped James taking his role as assistant, very seriously, bossing his younger brothers around like a tiny foreman. "Mama Samuel's not sweeping right," he announced on that first Saturday. "I am too sweeping right." "Boys," Hannah said without looking up from the bookshelf she was cleaning. "Less arguing, more working." "But Mama—" James Crawford. "I can multitask. I can clean and listen to you bicker at the same time, and neither task is improving my mood. Now sweep." William giggled from his corner where he was supposedly organizing chalk. "Mama said your whole name. That means you're in trouble." "I'm not in trouble, I'm just—" "James." He swept. Hannah hid her smile and kept working. This was good for them, she thought. Having purpose, having structure, being part of building something instead of just surviving. By Monday morning, the schoolhouse looked almost respectable. The children arrived in clusters, some walked from town, others rode in with parents from outlying farms. They ranged from 6-year-old twins named Mary and Martha to 14-year-old Lucas, who slouched in the back row and made it clear he thought school was beneath him. Hannah stood at the front of the room and felt every eye assess her. New teacher? Widow woman. Probably soft. Probably wouldn't last a week. "Good morning," she said clearly. "My name is Mrs. Crawford. I'll be teaching you this year, and we're going to start with some ground rules. First, you will arrive on time. Second, you will come prepared to work. Third, you will treat each other and me with respect. Anyone who can't manage those 3 things will find themselves answering to their parents about why they're no longer welcome in my classroom. Are we clear?" Silence. Then Lucas in the back spoke up, his tone deliberately challenging. "What if we don't care about being welcome?" Hannah walked down the aisle until she stood beside his desk. She didn't loom, didn't threaten, just looked at him steadily until he started to squirm. "Then you'll discover that your parents care very much about you wasting the opportunity for education that costs them time and money. You'll also discover that I'm far less interested in being liked than I am in doing my job, which means I have no problem making your life difficult if you make mine difficult. Your choice, Lucas. Which way would you like this year to go?" He stared at her for a long moment, clearly trying to decide if she was bluffing. Then, something in her expression must have convinced him because he looked down at his desk. "Respectful it is, then. Good choice." Hannah returned to the front. "Now let's begin with reading. I want to assess where each of you stands." The day was chaos wrapped in the thin veneer of structure. The younger children couldn't sit still. The middle ones fought constantly. Lucas tested boundaries every chance he got. By 3 o'clock, Hannah's head was pounding, and her voice was hoarse, but she'd survived. That was something. James, Samuel, and William had sat in the front row angels compared to the other students. Hannah caught James helping Mary with her letters during lunch, patient and kind, in a way that made her heart ache with pride and grief. He was so much like his father. The walk back to the ranch that afternoon felt longer than usual. Hannah's feet hurt. Her back ached. She wanted nothing more than to collapse into bed and sleep for a week. Instead, she found 15 hungry ranch hands waiting for dinner. "Rough day?" Pete asked, taking in her expression as she entered the kitchen. "Is it that obvious? You look like you've been wrestling cattle. How are the children?" "Feral, but educable, probably." Hannah tied on her apron and started pulling out supplies for dinner. "Give me 30 minutes and I'll have something ready." "No rush, boys can wait." But Pete didn't leave. He lingered, shifting his weight like a man working up to something difficult. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." You doing all right? Really? Between cooking here and teaching in town and managing your boys, that's a hell of a load you're carrying." Hannah paused, her hands stilling on the potatoes she'd been peeling. Was she all right? She was tired, overwhelmed, still grieving, still terrified that everything would fall apart. But she was also surviving, which was more than she'd been doing a month ago. "I'm managing," she said finally. "Some days better than others." "That's fair. Just want you to know if you need help, all you got to do is ask. The boys and I were glad you're here. Place feels different now. Better. More like a home instead of just a work camp." The kindness in his voice made her throat tight. "Thank you, Pete. That means more than you know." He nodded and left her to her cooking. Hannah worked quickly, her hands knowing the rhythm even while her mind wandered. A home instead of a work camp. Was that what she was building here? Not just surviving, but actually creating something. She was pulling biscuits from the oven when Dawson appeared in the doorway. She'd gotten used to his habit of materializing, silently watching for a moment before announcing himself. At first it had unnerved her. Now it felt almost comforting, like having a guardian she didn't have to acknowledge. "Smells good," he said. "It's just stew." "Best stew in Colorado, I'd wager." He came further into the kitchen and Hannah noticed he was favoring his left side slightly. "How was your first day teaching?" "Survived. Barely." "How was your day?" "Broke a green horse. Got kicked for my trouble." He said it casually, but Hannah saw the pain he was trying to hide. "Let me see." "It's nothing." "Dawson Baxter, sit down and let me see." Something in her tone, maybe the teacher voice she'd been using all day, made him obey without further argument. He sat at the table and carefully pulled up his shirt, revealing an ugly bruise blooming across his ribs, purple and black, and definitely not nothing. Hannah sucked in a breath. "You need a doctor." "It's just bruised. I've had worse." "That's not reassuring." She went to the pump for cold water and a cloth. "This is going to hurt." "Everything hurts. That's ranching." She pressed the cold cloth against the bruise and felt him tense. "Why do you do it, the dangerous work, I mean? You own the ranch. You could hire someone else to break horses." "Because I'm good at it. And because sitting back watching other people take risks while I count money feels wrong." He was quiet for a moment while she worked. "My father was like that. Owner who never got his hands dirty, made everyone around him resent him. I swore I'd be different." "You are different." Hannah refreshed the cloth with more cold water. "The men respect you. They work hard for you because you work hard beside them." "That's the idea, anyway." He caught her hand as she reached to apply the cloth again. "Hannah, I'm fine. Really, you don't have to fuss." But he didn't let go of her hand immediately. They sat like that for a moment, his calloused palm warm against her fingers, neither of them moving. Hannah felt her heartbeat pick up speed, awareness crackling between them like static before a storm. Then William came barreling into the kitchen, shouting about a bird's nest he'd found, and the moment shattered. Dawson released her hand and stood quickly, letting his shirt fall back into place. "I should wash up before dinner," he said, and left before Hannah could respond. She stood there holding the damp cloth, her hand still warm from his touch, and felt something shift inside her chest. Something dangerous and unwelcome and entirely too soon. No, she wasn't ready for this. Wasn't ready to feel anything for any man, especially not her employer who'd shown her nothing but kindness, and deserved better than a desperate widow projecting safety onto attraction. Hannah threw herself back into dinner preparation with renewed focus. She fed the ranch hands. She fed her boys. She cleaned up and walked back to the cabin in the gathering dark, forcing herself not to look toward the main house, not to wonder if Dawson was watching from that upstairs window again. That night, she dreamed of Thomas for the first time in weeks. He was standing in their old kitchen in Kansas, smiling the way he used to when she burned the biscuits, but pretended not to notice. In the dream, she ran to him, tried to hold him, but he turned to smoke in her arms. She woke gasping, tears on her face, guilt sitting on her chest like a stone. How dare she feel anything for another man? Thomas had been dead less than a year. Their boys still cried for him at night sometimes. What kind of wife moved on so quickly? Except she wasn't moving on. She was just surviving, and maybe starting to remember what it felt like to be alive instead of just existing. Hannah didn't go back to sleep. She sat in the dark and let herself cry for her dead husband, for the life they'd lost, for the woman she'd been before grief rewrote her completely. She cried until she was empty, until the sun started to rise, and it was time to be strong again. The next few weeks brought winter's first serious cold. Frost glittered on the ground each morning. The children arrived at school with red noses and frozen fingers, huddling around the pot-bellied stove. Hannah kept it stoked all day, burning through wood faster than expected. Lucas had finally stopped testing her and started actually learning. The twins were reading simple sentences. Even the older children who'd been convinced they were too far behind to catch up were making progress. Hannah fell into bed each night exhausted, but satisfied, feeling like she was finally building something that mattered. Her boys were thriving. James had taken to ranch life like he'd been born to it, following Pete around and learning everything about horses and cattle. Samuel had befriended Slim and spent hours in the smithy watching him work metal and asking endless questions. William still mostly played, but he was happy and healthy, and laughing again. They were healing, all of them. Slowly, painfully, but healing nonetheless. Hannah was carrying firewood to the schoolhouse one afternoon when a wagon pulled up. She looked up expecting a parent, but froze when she saw Margaret Crawford climbing down. Daniel's wife, the woman who'd stood silent while her husband slammed the door on 3 orphaned children. "Mrs. Crawford," Margaret said, her voice strained. "Might I have a word?" Hannah wanted to refuse, wanted to tell her to leave to go back to her comfortable house and her cruel husband and her clear conscience, but curiosity won. "The children have lunch," she said carefully. "We can talk outside." They walked away from the schoolhouse. Margaret twisted her hands together, clearly struggling with whatever she'd come to say. "I owe you an apology," she finally said, "for what happened when you came to our door, for not speaking up, for letting Daniel turn you away." "Why didn't you speak up, I mean?" "Because I'm a coward." Margaret's voice cracked. "Because Daniel has a temper, and I've learned it's easier to stay quiet than fight battles I can't win. Because I told myself it wasn't my place to contradict my husband. But I was wrong. Those were children. Your children. Thomas's children. And I let my husband's hardness turn away blood family." Hannah studied her face, looking for manipulation or false sentiment. But Margaret just looked tired and ashamed. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I can't sleep. Because I see those 3 little boys every time I close my eyes. Because word around town is that you're doing well, that you're teaching and working and raising your children right despite everything. And I'm so angry at Daniel, I can barely stand to be in the same room with him anymore." Margaret took a shaky breath. "I can't undo what happened. But I wanted you to know that not everyone in that house agreed with what was done. And that if you ever need anything at all, I'll help. Even if I have to do it behind Daniel's back." Hannah felt her anger soften slightly. Margaret was a victim too, in her way. Trapped by circumstance and fear and the limitations society placed on wives. Hannah knew what that felt like. "I appreciate you coming," she said finally. "And I accept your apology. But Margaret, you need to understand something. I don't need Daniel's help anymore. I don't need yours either. I found better. I found people who helped because it was right, not because obligation dragged them to it. So you can go home with a lighter conscience, but don't come here expecting gratitude or redemption. That's something you have to find on your own." Margaret nodded, wiping her eyes. "You're right. I needed you to know. That's all." She climbed back into her wagon and left. Hannah stood watching her go, feeling strange and unsettled. She'd wanted Margaret to feel guilty, had wanted someone from that house to acknowledge the cruelty. But now that it had happened, it felt hollow, empty. The closure she'd imagined didn't come. Maybe because real closure didn't come from other people's apologies. Maybe it only came from deciding to move forward regardless. Hannah went back to teaching, pushing the encounter from her mind. But that evening, as she cooked dinner at the ranch, she found herself telling Dawson about it. "Margaret Crawford came to apologize," she said while kneading dough, "for not speaking up when Daniel turned us away." Dawson was sitting at the table mending a bridle, his hands steady on the leather. "How'd that sit with you?" "Strange. I wanted her to feel guilty, but when she actually did, it didn't make me feel better. Guilt's a useless emotion if it doesn't lead to change. Margaret apologizing but staying married to a cruel man doesn't help anyone. That's harsh. That's honest." Dawson looked up at her. "You know what I've learned. People will disappoint you. Constantly. The only ones worth keeping close are the ones who show up when it matters. Margaret had her chance and didn't take it. Her guilt now doesn't change that." Hannah thought about that while she worked. He was right in a way, but he was also someone who'd clearly been disappointed enough times to stop trusting easily. There was protection in that philosophy, but also loneliness. "What about second chances?" she asked. "Don't people deserve those?" "Depends on the person. Depends on the situation. Someone who makes a mistake and owns it immediately. Sure. Someone who only feels bad after they see you surviving without them. That's not remorse. That's ego." "You're cynical." "I'm practical." But he smiled slightly. "Though I suppose you're right. I've gotten hard over the years. Watching people lets you down enough times will do that." "Who let you down?" The question came out before Hannah could stop it. Too personal, too probing. She immediately regretted it. But Dawson didn't look angry, just sad. "My father, my brother, half the people I thought were friends when Sarah was alive who disappeared after she died. Take your pick." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It taught me who was real. Pete stuck around. Charlie's father, he was the one who gave me my start, he stayed. The rest?" He shrugged. "Good riddance." Hannah shaped the dough into loaves and set them to rise. "For what it's worth, I think your father was wrong. You're a good man, Dawson Baxter." He was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't respond. Then softly, "You're the first person to say that in a long time." Their eyes met across the kitchen. Hannah felt that dangerous awareness again, stronger this time. The way he looked at her made her feel seen not as a desperate widow or a charity case, but as a person. A woman. Someone worth noticing. She looked away, first busying herself with cleaning up. "I should get the boys ready for bed." "Hannah," she paused. "Thank you for being here. For—" He stopped, seemed to reconsider what he was about to say. "Just thank you." She nodded and fled to the cabin, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. This was getting complicated. These feelings she couldn't afford to have. This awareness that grew stronger every day. She needed this job, needed the stability, couldn't risk losing it because she'd developed an inappropriate attachment to her employer. But God help her when Dawson looked at her like that, like she mattered, like she was more than just another mouth to feed. It was getting harder and harder to remember why she should keep her distance. November brought the first real snow. 6 inches overnight, turning the ranch into something from a Christmas card. The children at school pressed their faces against windows, distracted by the beauty outside. Hannah gave up trying to teach arithmetic and instead had them write descriptions of winter, anything to keep them focused. James came home that evening with snow in his hair and stars in his eyes. "Mama Pete says if the snow stays, I can help drive cattle to the winter pasture next week. Can I? Please." Hannah's immediate instinct was to say no. Too dangerous. Too far from her protection. But she looked at her son's eager face and remembered what Dawson had said about second chances, about trust, about letting people prove themselves. "If Pete says you're ready, and if you promise to follow every instruction exactly, then yes." James whooped and threw his arms around her. "Thank you, Mama. I'll be so careful, I promise." That night after the boys were asleep, Hannah stood on the porch watching snow fall in the lamplight. The ranch was quiet, beautiful, peaceful. She could hear cattle lowing softly in the distance. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney. The door to the main house opened, and Dawson stepped out onto his porch. They were maybe 50 yards apart, but in the snow-muffled silence, it felt closer. He raised a hand in greeting. She waved back. Neither of them moved. They just stood there in the cold, two lonely people acknowledging each other's existence under falling snow. It should have been nothing, a simple moment easily forgotten. But Hannah knew she'd remember it forever. The way the lamplight caught his profile. The quiet understanding that passed between them. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. Eventually, the cold drove her inside. She climbed into bed next to William, who'd crawled in with her again after a bad dream. She listened to him breathe and thought about how much had changed in just 2 months. They'd come here broken, desperate, convinced the world had nothing left to offer except closed doors and cruel rejections. But they'd found open doors instead. Found kindness. Found a place that was starting to feel like home. Hannah still wasn't sure where this was leading. Still couldn't see past tomorrow most days. But for the first time since Thomas died, she was starting to believe that maybe they'd be all right. That tomorrow might be better than today. That healing was possible even for hearts as shattered as hers. She fell asleep to the sound of snow against the window and William's soft breathing. And for once, she didn't dream of loss. She dreamed of spring coming, of snow melting, of new beginnings, waiting just over the horizon. The spring she'd dreamed about came slower than expected, fought for every inch by a winter that refused to release its grip. December brought storms that buried the ranch in snow so deep, the men had to dig paths between buildings. January froze the well solid twice. February teased them with a few warm days before dumping another foot of white misery. But through it all, life at the Circle B continued. The ranch hands worked in conditions that would have broken softer men. The children trudged to school through drifts up to their waists. And Hannah cooked and taught and kept her boys safe, falling into bed each night too exhausted to think about anything except tomorrow's tasks. It was in early March, when winter was finally starting to crack, that everything changed. Hannah woke one morning to find James burning with fever. Not the slight warmth of a common cold, but the dangerous heat that brought back memories of Thomas thrashing in sweat-soaked sheets, calling for water she couldn't give him fast enough. "Mama, I'm cold," James whispered, shaking under 3 blankets. Hannah's blood turned to ice. "Samuel, William, get dressed and go to the main house. Tell Mr. Baxter I need help. Now." They ran without questioning. Hannah stayed beside James, pressing cool cloths to his forehead and trying not to let terror take over. This couldn't be happening again. She couldn't lose another person to fever. She couldn't survive that. Dawson appeared within minutes, Pete right behind him. One look at James and Dawson's expression went grim. "How long has he been like this?" "He was fine when he went to bed." "I don't know." Hannah's voice cracked. "I don't know what happened." "Pete, ride to town. Get Dr. Morrison. Tell him it's urgent." Pete was already moving. Dawson knelt beside the bed, pressing his hand to James's forehead. "He's burning up. When's the last time he drank water?" "I don't know. Last night. Maybe he'll drink if I give it to him. Then we keep him drinking. Small amounts constantly. And we keep his fever down with cold cloths." Dawson met her eyes, and his steadiness cut through her panic. "Hannah, breathe. We're going to handle this. You don't understand. Thomas died from fever. 3 days and he was gone. I can't do that again." "You're not going to. James is young and strong. We caught it early, and Dr. Morrison is the best doctor in 3 counties. Dawson gripped her shoulder. "But I need you present, not panicking. Can you do that?" Hannah forced herself to breathe, to think, to be the mother James needed, instead of the terrified widow reliving old nightmares. Yes, I can do that." "Good. I'll stay with you until the doctor arrives." He did, for the next 2 hours while they waited for Pete to return with Dr. Morrison. Dawson sat across from Hannah and helped her care for James. He fetched water, wrung out cloths, spoke quietly to the boy when he woke confused and scared. He didn't leave, didn't delegate to someone else, just stayed solid and reliable as bedrock. Samuel and William huddled in the doorway watching with wide, frightened eyes. Hannah wanted to comfort them, but she couldn't leave James, couldn't take her attention away for even a moment. "Boys," Dawson said gently, "why don't you go up to the main house, Mrs. Abernathy? She's the woman who comes to clean. She's there making bread. I bet she'd appreciate help, and you can eat breakfast." "But James," Samuel's voice wobbled, "your mama and I are taking good care of him, but standing there worrying won't help. Go on now. We'll send word the minute the doctor's been." They left reluctantly. Hannah heard their footsteps fade and felt gratitude wash over her. Dawson had read the situation perfectly. The younger boys needed distraction, and she needed to focus without feeling guilty about ignoring them. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet. Save it for when James is better." When, not if. Hannah clung to that certainty like a lifeline. Dr. Morrison arrived just before noon, a gray-haired man with gentle hands and sharp eyes. He examined James thoroughly while Hannah twisted her apron into knots and tried to breathe. Finally, he straightened. "It's influenza. Bad strain, but I've seen worse. The boy's strong, and you caught it early. That's in his favor." "What do we do?" Hannah asked. "Exactly what you're already doing. Keep him cool, keep him hydrated, and watch for signs of pneumonia. That's what kills with influenza. Labored breathing, chest pain, blue lips. You see any of that, you send for me immediately." "How long until we know if he'll—" She couldn't finish the sentence. 3 days usually. If he makes it through 3 days without complications, he'll recover. Dr. Morrison packed his bag. "I'll check back tomorrow. Meanwhile, you need to prepare for the other boys to catch it. Influenza spreads like wildfire. Everyone in this house should expect to get sick." Hannah's stomach dropped. "Everyone?" "Most likely. Best thing you can do is rest when you can eat well and pray your constitution holds up. You can't nurse them if you're flat on your back yourself." He left instructions and headed back to town. Hannah stood in the cabin feeling the weight of new fear pressing down. If all 3 boys got sick at once, if she got sick too. "Don't borrow trouble," Dawson said, reading her expression. "Today we deal with James. Tomorrow we deal with tomorrow. You should leave. You'll catch it too if you stay." "Probably already caught it. Besides, someone needs to help you, and I'm volunteering." He picked up the bucket of water. "I'll get fresh. You eat something. You're no good to anyone if you collapse." Hannah wanted to argue, but she was too tired and too grateful. She forced down bread and cheese while Dawson refreshed their water supply. Then they settled in for what would be the longest 3 days of her life. James got worse before he got better. That night his fever spiked so high he started hallucinating, crying for his father, begging Hannah not to leave him. She held him and wept and promised things she had no power to guarantee. Dawson stayed through it all, taking shifts so Hannah could rest for an hour here and there, though she barely slept. Pete brought food they didn't eat. Mrs. Abernathy kept Samuel and William at the main house, sparing them the worst of watching their brother suffer. Charlie checked in every few hours with offers of help that mostly went unused because there was nothing anyone could do except wait. On the second day, Samuel developed a fever. Hannah wanted to scream at the unfairness of it, but she just set up a second sickbed and divided her attention between both boys. Dawson stayed. She'd stopped asking him to leave, stopped pretending she didn't desperately need his presence. "Why are you doing this?" she asked him late that second night, both boys finally sleeping fitfully. "You barely know us. This isn't your responsibility." Dawson was quiet for a long moment, staring at the dim lamp. "When Sarah died, I was alone. Completely alone. My family didn't come. My friends, most of them disappeared. It was just me and grief and this empty house that felt like a tomb. I swore if I ever had the chance to make sure someone else didn't face their worst moments alone, I would. So here I am. Hannah felt tears slide down her face. I don't know how to repay this kindness. Don't need repaying, just need you to remember it when someone else needs help down the line. That's how kindness works. You pass it forward, not back. On the third morning, James's fever broke. Hannah woke from an exhausted doze to find him looking at her with clear eyes, asking for water, in a voice that sounded weak but rational. She nearly collapsed with relief, pressing kisses to his forehead, and thanking God, and checking his temperature 3 times to make sure she wasn't imagining it. "Mama, you're squishing me," James protested, but he was smiling. Dr. Morrison confirmed it that afternoon. James was past the crisis point. Samuel's fever broke the next day. By some miracle, William never got sick at all, his young immune system apparently deciding influenza wasn't worth the bother. Hannah predictably collapsed 2 days later. She woke to find herself in her own bed with no memory of getting there. Her head felt stuffed with cotton, and her throat burned like she'd swallowed glass. Every muscle ached. When she tried to sit up, the room spun violently. "Easy," Dawson's voice came from somewhere nearby. "You're sick. Lie down." The boys are fine. James is up and walking. Samuel's recovering nicely. William's eating everything in sight and driving Mrs. Abernathy crazy. Now lie down before you fall down. Hannah sank back against the pillows, too weak to fight. "You shouldn't be here. It's not proper." "Hannah, I've been here for 6 days. Propriety left the building about 5 days ago. Now drink this." He held a cup to her lips. She drank, tasting honey and lemon, and something bitter she couldn't identify. "What is that?" "Medicine. Dr. Morrison left it. Said it would help with the fever and pain." "You called the doctor for me." "Of course I called the doctor for you. What kind of question is that?" He set the cup aside. "Now sleep. I'll be here when you wake up." Hannah wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could take care of herself, wanted to maintain some shred of dignity. But she was so tired, and having someone else be strong for a while sounded better than anything in the world. She let her eyes close. The next few days passed in a fever dream haze. She'd wake to find Dawson changing cool cloths on her forehead. She'd drift off and wake to Pete bringing soup. Mrs. Abernathy appeared to help her change into a clean nightgown, matter-of-fact and efficient. The boys peeked in to wave, kept at a distance until she was less contagious. And through it all, Dawson stayed, reading to her when she was restless, sitting silent when she needed quiet, making sure she drank enough, ate enough, rested enough, being exactly what she needed without her having to ask. On the 4th day, Hannah woke feeling human again. The fever was gone. Her head was clear. She was weak as a kitten, but definitely on the mend. She found Dawson asleep in the chair beside her bed, his head tilted at an angle that would leave his neck stiff, his hand resting near hers on the blanket. He'd stayed. Through 6 days of sickness and fear, and the very real possibility that he'd get sick himself, which Pete had mentioned during one of Hannah's more lucid moments, he'd stayed. No one had asked him to. No one had expected it. He'd just decided she wouldn't face this alone, and made it happen. Hannah watched him sleep and felt something crack open in her chest. Not just gratitude, though there was plenty of that. Not just respect, though he'd certainly earned it. Something deeper. Something that terrified her because it felt too big, too soon, too impossible given everything she'd lost. She was falling in love with Dawson Baxter. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She couldn't be. Wouldn't let herself be. Thomas had been dead less than a year. Good widows mourned longer. Good wives didn't move on so quickly. Good mothers didn't risk their children's stability by developing feelings for their employer. But her heart apparently didn't care about what good widows were supposed to do. It just knew that this man had shown her more genuine kindness in 3 months than she'd experienced in years. That he'd stayed when he could have left. That he looked at her like she mattered, like she was worth the effort, like she was more than just another obligation. Hannah closed her eyes and tried to push the feelings away. Tried to tell herself it was just gratitude mixed with exhaustion. Tried to believe she could keep working for him, living on his ranch, seeing him every day without these feelings growing stronger. She was lying to herself and she knew it. Dawson stirred his eyes, opening slowly. When he saw her awake and watching him, he sat up quickly, wincing at the stiffness in his neck. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Better. Much better." Her voice came out rough. "How long have you been here?" "Doesn't matter. Do you need anything?" "Water, food?" "Dawson?" She waited until he met her eyes. "Thank you. For everything. For staying. For taking care of my boys. For—" Her voice broke. "Thank you." Something shifted in his expression, some barrier lowering just slightly. "Hannah, I told you before. You don't face hard things alone. Not while I'm around to help." "But why? Why do you care so much?" He was quiet for a long moment, and she thought he might not answer. Then softly, "Because the first time I saw you sitting on that bench in town, looking like your world had ended, I saw myself 12 years ago. Lost. Alone. Certain there was nothing left worth living for. And I thought if I could help you find your way back, maybe it would mean something. Maybe it would prove that grief doesn't have to destroy everything." "Did it destroy you?" "Almost. Probably would have if Charlie's father hadn't forced me to keep living. Gave me work when I wanted to die. Made me care about something again. Saved my life, really, though I didn't appreciate it at the time." He looked down at his hands. "I see him in me now when I look at you. See the chance to pass forward what he gave me. That's why I care." Hannah felt tears spill over. "I'm so sorry for what you lost." "I'm sorry for what you lost too. Thomas sounds like he was a good man." "He was. He really was." She wiped her eyes. "But he's gone. And I have to figure out how to keep living without him. I'm just not sure I know how anymore." "You're doing it already. Every day you wake up and take care of your boys, you're living. Every day you teach those children, you're living. Every time you choose to keep going instead of giving up, you're proving that grief doesn't get the final word." Dawson reached out and took her hand, and the gesture felt both natural and momentous. "You're stronger than you know, Hannah Crawford." She looked at their joined hands and felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling. This was dangerous. This was too fast. This was everything she'd promised herself she wouldn't let happen. But God help her, she didn't want him to let go. "Dawson," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "All right." "I've been feeling—" She stopped, searching for words. "You've been so kind to me. To my boys. And I'm grateful, I truly am. But lately, I've been feeling things that are more than gratitude, and I don't know what to do with that because it's too soon, and it's not appropriate. And I still love Thomas. Hannah." He squeezed her hand gently. "Breathe." She breathed. He waited. When she felt steadier, she tried again. "I think I'm developing feelings for you. Feelings I shouldn't have. And I needed you to know because it's not fair to you, and because I don't want you to think I'm taking advantage of your kindness, and because—" She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Because I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way every time you walk into a room." The silence that followed felt endless. Hannah watched emotions flicker across Dawson's face. Surprise, something that might have been hope, then careful neutrality. "Hannah," he said slowly, "I'm honored that you'd trust me with that. But I need you to understand something. You've been through hell. You nearly lost your son. You've been sick yourself. Emotions run high in situations like this. What you're feeling might just be— Don't." She pulled her hand back. "Don't tell me what I'm feeling. I know it's complicated. I know it's messy. I know it's too soon by every measure society uses. But I also know that what I feel when I look at you isn't just gratitude or confusion or sickbed delusion. It's real. I believe you. But Hannah, you work for me. You live on my property. There's an inherent power imbalance that makes this complicated. If you feel pressure to... I don't feel pressure. I feel... She laughed bitterly. I feel terrified and guilty and completely overwhelmed. But not pressured. Never pressured. You've never been anything but respectful. Dawson stood and paced to the window, his back to her. Hannah watched him struggle with whatever he was thinking, and fear crept in. She'd ruined everything. He'd ask her to leave. She'd lose this job, this home, this stability she'd built for her boys. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. I need to be honest with you. I've been fighting similar feelings for weeks now. Every time you smile, every time you stand up to one of the ranch hands, or handle your boys, or just exist in the world, being strong and brave and trying so damn hard, I look at you, and I see... He stopped, took a breath. I see someone I could care about deeply. Someone I already do care about, if I'm being truthful. Hope flared in Hannah's chest. Then why do you sound like that's a problem? Because it's too fast. Because you're still grieving. Because I'm your employer, and you depend on me for survival, which means any relationship between us starts from an unequal place. Because... He turned to face her. Because I can't be the reason you make a decision you'll regret later. I can't take advantage of your vulnerability, even if you're offering freely. I care about you too much for that. Hannah felt tears threatening again, but this time from frustration. So what are you saying? That we just ignore this? Pretend it doesn't exist? I'm saying we wait. We give you time to heal. Time to be sure this isn't just gratitude or relief or exhaustion disguising itself as something else. Time for you to build your own independence so that if something does develop between us, it's because you truly want it, not because you need it. He came back to sit beside her bed. Hannah, if what we're both feeling is real, it'll still be real in 6 months, in a year, in however long it takes for you to be certain. And if I'm certain now, then waiting won't change that. It'll just prove it. He took her hand again, and his grip was warm and steady. I want you to be sure, completely sure. Because if this goes somewhere, I want it to be right. Not rushed. Not born out of crisis. Just right. Hannah wanted to argue, wanted to insist she knew her own heart. But underneath the frustration, she recognized the wisdom in what he was saying. She was raw, vulnerable, still finding her feet. Making decisions about her future while barely recovered from fever probably wasn't smart. You're right, she admitted quietly. I hate that you're right, but you are. I usually am. It's one of my more annoying qualities. He said it with a slight smile, trying to lighten the mood. So what do? We keep doing what we've been doing. You work, I work. We take care of the ranch and your boys and the daily business of living. And we give this time to breathe instead of forcing it. He paused. But Hannah, I need you to know something. This conversation doesn't change my commitment to you and your boys. You still have a job here. You still have a home. That's not conditional on anything except you wanting to stay. Relief flooded through her. You're sure? I'm sure. This is your place as long as you want it. Hannah leaned back against the pillows, exhausted but oddly at peace. They'd said the difficult things, acknowledged the complicated feelings, and instead of rushing into something neither of them was ready for, they'd chosen to wait. It was mature, responsible, probably the smartest decision either of them could make. It still hurt, but as Dawson sat there holding her hand, watching her with those steady eyes that had seen his own share of grief and survival, Hannah felt something settle in her chest. Not resolution exactly, not certainty, but hope. Real hope that maybe there was a future ahead that held more than just survival. Maybe there was a chance at actual happiness waiting somewhere down the road. Get some rest, Dawson said gently. I'll check on you later. He left, and Hannah closed her eyes, feeling the ghost of his hand still warm against hers. Outside, she could hear her boys playing, their laughter carrying through the walls. Spring was coming, finally, the long winter starting to release its grip. And inside her heart, something frozen was starting to thaw too, slowly, carefully, but definitely thawing. She fell asleep thinking about possibilities instead of losses, about futures instead of pasts. And for the first time in a year, those thoughts didn't feel like betrayal. They felt like healing. Spring arrived in earnest 2 weeks later, bursting across the ranch with the enthusiasm of something long denied. Snow melted into rushing streams. Grass pushed up through mud. The air turned soft and warm, carrying promises of new beginnings that felt almost too good to trust. Hannah recovered fully, throwing herself back into work with renewed energy. The conversation with Dawson hung between them like something delicate and unspoken, changing nothing on the surface but altering everything underneath. They were careful with each other now, polite, professional, maintaining distance, even while their eyes said different things entirely. It was torture. It was necessary. It was the right thing to do, which somehow made it worse. The boys noticed nothing, thank God. They were too busy being children again, running wild through fields, helping with spring calving, driving the ranch hands crazy with questions and endless energy. James had fully recovered and seemed taller somehow, like surviving illness had stretched him toward manhood. Samuel had attached himself to Slim with the devotion of a puppy learning blacksmithing with serious focus. And William remained, William Sunshine personified, making everyone smile just by existing. Hannah's teaching had hit its stride too. The children were actually learning, even Lucas, who'd started the year, convinced education was useless. She'd caught him reading an adventure novel during lunch last week, so absorbed he didn't hear her approach. When he realized she'd seen him, he'd turned red and started to hide the book. "Don't," she'd said. "Reading for pleasure is just as important as reading for lessons. Keep going." His expression had shifted from embarrassment to something like gratitude. "My pa says reading's for people who can't do real work." "Your pa's wrong. Reading lets you live 1,000 lives. Experience things you'd never get to otherwise. That's more valuable than most real work I can think of." He'd ducked his head, but kept the book. Hannah had walked away feeling like maybe, just maybe, she was making a difference. It was a Saturday in late April when everything shifted again. Hannah was working in the garden plot behind the cabin, trying to reclaim it from winter's damage, when she heard horses approaching. She looked up to find 3 riders, Dawson, Pete, and a man she didn't recognize. A stranger, well-dressed, sitting his horse like someone accustomed to authority. "Hannah," Dawson called. "Can you come here a moment?" She wiped dirt from her hands and walked over, suddenly conscious of her old dress and tangled hair. The stranger was watching her with interest that made her uncomfortable. "Mrs. Crawford, this is Gerald Whitmore," Dawson said, his tone carefully neutral. "He's from Denver, owns several businesses there." "Ma'am," Whitmore tipped his hat. "Pleasure to meet you." "Mr. Whitmore." Hannah nodded politely, waiting for explanation. "I'll be direct," Whitmore said. "I'm looking to hire a teacher for a private school I'm establishing in Denver. Quality education for children of means. I was in town yesterday and spoke with Mrs. Henderson about possibilities. She mentioned you. Said you're the best teacher this area has seen in years." Hannah blinked, surprised. "That's kind of her." "She also mentioned you're a widow with 3 children working 2 jobs to make ends meet. My offer would solve that problem. Salary of $50 a month plus housing for you and your boys. Good housing in a good neighborhood. You'd teach Monday through Friday, no additional work required. Your sons would attend the school free of charge. $50 a month." Hannah's mind reeled. That was more than double what she made now. That was security. That was the ability to save money to build a real future. That was everything she'd been working toward. That's a generous offer, Mr. Whitmore." "It's a fair offer for quality work. Mrs. Henderson was quite emphatic about your abilities." He leaned forward slightly. "I'll be honest, Mrs. Crawford. Good teachers are hard to find. Ones who can handle difficult students, maintain discipline, and actually educate rather than just supervise those are rare. I need someone competent. Based on what I've heard, you're more than competent. I'd need time to think about it. Of course. I'll be in the area through Tuesday. You can send word to the hotel in town. He tipped his hat again. I hope you'll consider it seriously. It's a real opportunity. He rode off, leaving Hannah standing there feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. $50 a month. Denver. A fresh start in a real city with real prospects. Everything she'd thought she wanted. She looked at Dawson and found his expression carefully blank. You didn't know he was coming, she said. Found out when he showed up at my door an hour ago, asking directions to your cabin. His voice was even controlled. It's a good offer, Hannah. It is. You should consider it. I know. They stood there in awkward silence. Pete cleared his throat. I'm gonna check on that fence in the south pasture. He rode off quickly, leaving them alone. Dawson. You don't owe me an explanation. This is your decision, your future. He dismounted, standing close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw. But I want you to make it based on what's right for you and your boys, not based on anything else. Anything else meaning you, meaning whatever's between us that we've been dancing around for months. Don't stay because of that. Don't leave because of it either. Just make the choice that's best for you. Hannah felt frustration rising. What if I don't know what's best? What if both choices feel right and wrong at the same time? Then you think about it. Really think about it. What do you want your life to look like? What do your boys need? What would make you happy instead of just safe? He paused. And you're honest with yourself about whether you're staying here because you want to or because you're afraid to leave. That hit harder than expected. Was she afraid? Maybe. This ranch had been sanctuary when she'd had nothing. These people had saved her. Walking away from that felt ungrateful, even if she was walking toward something better. But was it better or just different? I need to think, she said. That's smart. Take your time. Dawson mounted his horse again. For what it's worth, whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. You came here broken, and you've rebuilt yourself into someone strong. Someone any employer would be lucky to have. Don't forget that. He rode away before she could respond. Hannah stood in the garden and tried to process what had just happened. 5 months ago, she'd been desperate for any opportunity. Now she had 2 paths in front of her, and no idea which one to choose. She went inside and found her boys at the table, William coloring, while James helped Samuel with arithmetic. They looked up when she entered, 3 faces bright with health and happiness. Mama, who was that man? James asked. Someone offering me a job, in Denver. All 3 boys went still. Denver. Samuel's voice was small. That's far away. It is, but it's a good job. Better pay. Good school for you boys. We like it here, William said, his lip trembling. We like the horses, and Mr. Baxter, and Slim and Pete and Charlie. James was watching her with those 2 old eyes. But Denver would be better for us. More opportunities. Maybe. I don't know yet. Do you want to go? James asked. Hannah sank into a chair. I don't know, baby. Part of me thinks yes, better money, better prospects, a real city with real chances for all of us. But part of me... She stopped, unsure how to explain. Part of me thinks we've already found what we need right here. Then stay, Samuel said simply. Stay here with Mr. Baxter and the ranch and everything. It's not that simple. Why not? Why not indeed? Hannah looked at her youngest son and realized he'd cut straight to the heart of it. Why was she even considering leaving when everything she needed was already here? When her boys were happy and healthy, when she had work she loved, and a community that valued her, because $50 a month was security. Because Denver was respectability. Because staying felt too much like settling, like giving up on bigger dreams. or because staying meant confronting feelings for Dawson that terrified her. Because leaving was easier than risking her heart again. "Let me think about it," she told her boys. "I'll decide by Tuesday. That's fair, right?" They nodded, but their faces were worried. Hannah hugged them close and tried to feel certain about something, anything, but certainty remained elusive. That evening she walked to the main house to start dinner. The kitchen felt different somehow, smaller, more familiar, more like home than just a workplace. She'd cooked thousands of meals here over 5 months, learned where every pot lived, memorized which burners ran hot, created something nourishing from basic ingredients. She'd built a life here. Not the life she'd planned, but a good life nonetheless. The ranch hands filed in for dinner with their usual noise and chaos. But tonight, Charlie had news that shifted everyone's attention. "Got a letter from my sister," he announced. "She's getting married in June. Wants me to come back to Missouri for the wedding." "You going?" Slim asked. "Thinking about it. Haven't been home in 3 years. But it's a long trip and I hate to leave during busy season." "Go," Dawson said firmly. "Family matters. We'll manage without you for a couple weeks." "You sure, boss?" "I'm sure. Send your sister my congratulations." The conversation moved on, but Hannah was struck by something. Dawson could have said no. Could have insisted the ranch came first. Instead, he'd encouraged Charlie to prioritize family, to take time for what mattered. That was who Dawson Baxter was, someone who understood that people mattered more than work. That relationships trumped convenience. That doing right was more important than doing easy. Hannah served dinner and watched him interact with his men, joking with Slim, checking on Pete's sore shoulder, listening to Jack complain about something trivial without shutting him down. He was a good boss. But more than that, he was a good man. And somewhere in the last 5 months, this place had become home. After dinner, Hannah was washing dishes when Dawson appeared in the doorway. "Got a minute?" "Of course." He came in and closed the door behind him, which was unusual enough to make her nervous. "I need to say something, and I need you to hear me out without interrupting. Can you do that?" "All right." "I meant what I said earlier about this being your decision, about making it based on what's right for you. And I meant what I said months ago about giving you time to be sure of your feelings." He took a breath. "But I also need to be honest. If you leave for Denver, I'm going to regret not telling you this. So here it is." He stepped closer, close enough that Hannah could see the emotion in his eyes. "I'm in love with you. Have been for months, probably since that first day when you looked at me like you were ready to fight the world if I said one wrong word. You're strong and brave, and you love your boys with a fierceness that humbles me. You've built a life here from nothing, earned respect from hard men who don't give it easily, and you've made this ranch feel like a home instead of just a place people work." Hannah's breath caught. "Dawson, not done. You told me in March that you had feelings for me, and I told you to wait to be sure, and I stand by that. I don't want you staying because you feel obligated or because I said this. But I also don't want you leaving without knowing that if you stay, there's something real here. Something worth building on. Not just a job. Not just a place to live. But a future. With me. If you want it." The silence stretched between them. Hannah felt tears building, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "I want you to take that job in Denver, if it's what you truly want," Dawson continued quietly. "If it's what's best for your boys. If it's the life you're meant to have. But if you're leaving because you're scared, or because you think you don't deserve to be happy here, or because you're running from feelings that scare you, then I'm asking you to stay. Not for me. For yourself." "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything yet. Think about it. Really think. And then decide." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. Sarah, my wife, she'd have liked you. Would have told me I was an idiot for waiting so long to say something. So I'm saying it now while I still have the chance." He left. Hannah stood at the sink with soapy hands and tears running down her face, feeling like her heart was being torn in two different directions. Denver meant security, meant independence, meant building something that was entirely hers without owing anyone anything. But the Circle B meant family, meant community, meant Dawson and the possibility of love she'd thought she'd never feel again. That night after her boys were asleep, Hannah pulled out Thomas's pocket watch. She'd kept it all these months, the last piece of him she had left. She opened it and looked at his photograph, inside young, smiling, frozen in a moment before fever stole him away. "I don't know what to do," she whispered to his image. "Part of me feels guilty even considering moving on, like I'm betraying you. But you're gone, Thomas. You're gone and I'm still here, and I have to figure out how to keep living." The watch ticked steadily, marking seconds that would never stop. Time moved forward, whether she was ready or not. "I think you'd like him," Hannah continued. "Dawson. He's good to the boys. He's kind and steady, and he makes me feel safe. Not the way you did different, but good different, real different." She wiped her eyes. "I think you'd tell me to be happy, to take the chance. Am I right?" No answer came, because dead men didn't speak. But Hannah thought maybe she knew what Thomas would say. He'd always wanted her to be happy. Had always put her and the boys first. He wouldn't want her frozen in grief, refusing to live because he couldn't. He'd want her to choose joy when she found it. The decision crystallized slowly over the next 2 days. Hannah taught her students and cooked meals and cared for her boys, all while her mind churned through possibilities. She made lists of pros and cons. She prayed for guidance. She lay awake at night staring at the ceiling. On Monday evening, she asked Eleanor Henderson to watch the boys. Then she walked to the main house and knocked on Dawson's door. He answered, looking surprised. "Hannah, everything all right?" "I need to talk to you." "Of course. Come in." His sitting room was comfortable and masculine, full of books and leather and the smell of wood smoke. Hannah had never been in here before. It felt intimate crossing this threshold. "I made my decision," she said without preamble. Dawson went very still. "All right. I'm sending word to Mr. Whitmore that I'm declining his offer." She watched relief and joy flash across his face before he controlled his expression. "Are you sure, Hannah, that's a lot of money to turn down?" "I'm sure. I've been thinking about what you said. About what I want my life to look like. About what would make me happy instead of just safe." She stepped closer. "I've been safe before. Safe and comfortable, and living a perfectly fine life that felt small. And when I lost that, I thought I wanted to build the same thing again. Security, respectability, protection from anything that could hurt me. That's not unreasonable. It's not, but it's not enough either." Hannah met his eyes. "These past 5 months I've built something better than safe. I've built a life that challenges me, that lets me be strong, that lets my boys be wild and free and happy. I've found people who value me not for what I can do for them, but for who I am. And I've found—" Her voice caught. "I've found someone who makes me want to be brave instead of just careful." "Hannah, let me finish. When Thomas died, I thought my chance at love died with him. Thought that part of my life was over and I just had to accept it. But then you—" She laughed shakily. "You complicated everything. Made me feel things I wasn't ready to feel. Made me want things I'd convinced myself I couldn't have. And now I'm ready. I'm sure. I've given it time like you asked. I've thought about it from every angle. And I keep coming back to the same truth. I love you, Dawson Baxter. I love your steadiness and your kindness and the way you make my boys laugh. I love how you treat your men with respect and how you never once made me feel small or helpless or less than. I love—" Her voice broke. "I love that you gave me time to be sure instead of rushing me. That you put my needs before your own. That you've been exactly what I needed even when I didn't know what that was." Dawson crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. Hannah felt herself melt against him, feeling safe and wanted and home in a way that had nothing to do with buildings or locations. "I love you too," he said against her hair. God, Hannah, I love you so much. They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other, letting the reality of spoken feelings settle between them. When Dawson pulled back to look at her face, his expression was tender and wondering. Are you absolutely certain? He asked. Because once you turn down Denver, that door closes. I need you to be sure this is what you want. I'm sure. I'm staying here because this is where I belong, where my boys belong. Not because I'm afraid of Denver, but because I'd be afraid to leave this, to leave you. He kissed her, then soft and careful and full of promise. Hannah kissed him back and felt something long frozen finally thaw completely. This was right. This was real. This was the future she was meant to have. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dawson pressed his forehead to hers. So what happens now? Now we figure it out together. Take things slow. Let the boys adjust. Build something real instead of rushed. I can do slow. Can you? Hannah teased. You were just kissing me like slow might kill you. Slow's relative. That was slow by some standards. She laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. We should tell the boys. They're worried. We should. But Hannah... He caught her hand. One more thing. I know you're still Thomas's widow. I know he'll always be part of your story. I'm not trying to replace him or make you forget. I just want to be the next chapter if you'll let me. Fresh tears spilled over. You're not the next chapter. You're the plot twist I never saw coming. The one that changed everything. They walked back to the cabin, hand in hand. The boys were waiting on the porch, all three trying to act casual, but clearly anxious. When they saw Hannah and Dawson holding hands, their faces transformed. You're staying? James asked Hope, breaking through careful control. We're staying. William launched himself at both of them, with a whoop of joy. Samuel wrapped his arms around Hannah's waist. James, trying to be grown up, just smiled, but his eyes were bright with unshed tears of relief. Does this mean Mr. Baxter will be our new papa? William asked. Hannah looked at Dawson, letting him answer. That's up to your mama, he said carefully. But I'd be honored to be part of your family if you boys would have me. Yes, Samuel and William shouted in unison. James was quieter. Will you still let us remember our first papa? Dawson knelt down to James's level. Your father was a good man who loved you very much. Nothing about me being here changes that. We'll honor his memory together. Deal. James studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Deal. They spent the evening on the cabin porch, the five of them talking about what came next. Dawson and Hannah would court properly for a while, let the boys adjust. Eventually, when everyone was ready, they'd marry. The boys would stay in the cabin until then. Propriety mattered even in ranch country. But they'd be a family building something together. When you marry Mama, will we move to the big house? Samuel asked. Would you want to? It's awful big. It is. But it's got room for all of us. Room for you boys to spread out. Room for whatever comes next. Hannah felt her cheeks warm at the implication. Whatever comes next. Maybe more children someday. Maybe just the five of them growing together. Either way, the future stretched ahead, full of possibility instead of just survival. That night, after the boys were finally asleep, Hannah stood on the porch one last time. The ranch was quiet under stars that seemed close enough to touch. From the main house, she could see lamplight in Dawson's window. As she watched, his silhouette appeared, and he raised a hand in greeting. She waved back, her heart full to bursting. 5 months ago, she'd arrived here broken, desperate, convinced the world had nothing left to offer except closed doors and cruelty. She'd been rejected by blood family and reduced to begging strangers for help. But one stranger had said yes, had opened his door and his home, and eventually his heart, had shown her that kindness still existed, that good people still walked the earth, that second chances were real if you were brave enough to take them. Hannah had been cast aside by those who should have protected her. But in that rejection, she'd found something better than charity, From reluctant family, she'd found genuine love from someone who chose her freely. The journey from that bench in Willow Creek to this porch at the Circle B had been hard, terrifying, full of moments when giving up seemed easier than going on. But she'd kept fighting, kept choosing to live instead of just survive. And somehow, impossibly, she'd found her way home. Not the home she'd lost, not the life she'd planned, but something better, a love built on mutual respect and shared struggle, a family blended from grief and grace, a future forged from the ashes of everything she'd survived. Hannah Crawford had been told there was no room for her and her mouths to feed, but Dawson Baxter had looked at her and said, "You're home now." And standing here under stars that had witnessed both her darkest moments and her brightest hopes, Hannah finally believed him. She was home. She was loved. She was exactly where she belonged, and that after everything was more than enough. It was everything.